This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Tuesday, December 27th edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, coming from you not from the Brooklyn bunker today, but from the bunker in my childhood home. This was actually at one point my dad's bunker, and it's being repurposed for the show today. Technology wasn't such in his broadcasting days that he ever broadcast anything live from this house ever. So even though this house has been home to a broadcaster for the better part of since 1973, this is the first live broadcast out here from Port Washington, Long Island. So that's pretty cool. Joined today for our show number 200, amazing we've lasted this long, by the usual crew. We have, from a bunker of his own in Forest Hills, Queens, Mike Hogan.
Hello, yeah, sitting on the couch next to a sick child, so hopefully it won't be too distracting.
We've had Teddy's had cameos on the show before. Hopefully, maybe this one will be more successful than the last. We'll see. We also have coming to us from Woodland Hills, California, still in hangover mode, not from overindulgence, simply from all the excitement of opening day at Santa Anita. How far are you from the track, JK?
According to the Waze app, 43 minutes. So that's always a good sign. As long as it's within an hour, I can deal with it. Speaking of a sick kid, I have a sick kid in a different meaning of the word sick. He has discovered sugar cereals. It's been shielded from him his entire life. He was up at 5:45 wanting to get back into the Lucky Charms for the second day in a row. So I'm going to have to wean him off of that.
Oh, that's some serious stuff. That voice you hear is Jonathon Kinchen. I think we should start today's show. I had all these grandiose plans for show number 200, and then it ends up falling exactly around the holiday. The first grandiose plan was to do like a whole 15-minute history of the podcast, where we'd go back and we'd start sort of with the original format with Matt Bernier and I, and point out that the first 6 episodes or so were basically just Mike and I making fun of how young Matt Bernier was, interspersed with a couple of occasional clever picks from the three of us, and then sort of following it along as the show evolved, tracing Jonathon Kinchen's role from occasional guest to full-blown co-host. We were going to have plenty of that, and certainly some montages involving the term one-turn horse were going to appear as well. My second, less ambitious plan was to at least have Mr. Bernier on as a guest, and I think I still do want to do that, but perhaps we'll do that on show 201 or 202 or 203, where we bring Matt back in and just sort of catch up on him. Folks who are listening to this show should also be listening, watching, downloading the Matt Bernier show every week. Some great stuff on there as well, and terrific racing content there, and also throughout the whole of the DRF video department and the fantastic stuff, in-depth race analysis that Dan Illman does along with Mike Beer and, of course, Matt. But I'll start off today's show by asking a question of Mike. And Mike, it's very simple. When we cramped in that little studio that wasn't even, I think, properly quite unpacked yet, whenever it was, I guess about 2 1/3 years ago, to do the first episode of the DRF Players Podcast, did you think we'd make it to show number 200?
No, I didn't even know if we'd make it through show 5. I had no idea what was going to lay in store for this. I didn't know if it was some sort of grand experiment that nobody would care about and would fail after the first week. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's Mike's involvement of the show was originally more along the lines of like a content producer, but once we got him going, we realized how much he brought to the program, and you've evolved at sometimes being the full-on host of the show and always participating, and I know the listeners are glad of that. And Jonathon, I mean, you weren't even, I can't even remember, what was your first involvement in the show?
I think my first involvement was like a guest deal. Maybe it was even like one of the times where you did like a 15-minute interview with me even before I was on. Like the first time I was actually on, geez, I don't even remember.
I could maybe do a little searching and try and find that. That'll be fun to dig out.
It would be fun if, as we go along here, we can do some memories from the show, some funny sound packages and things. And it sounds like there might be an amusing one or two from the show we did on Thursday. Some comments we made that were prescient and others not so prescient. JK, how would you describe opening day at Santa Anita for you this year?
Oh, it was fun. It was if the people that got to tune in and watch TQ, there's a pretty big emphasis on the fact that it was my first time to bring my son to Santa Anita. I've brought him to Del Mar before. I've taken him to Lone Star Park before, but this is his first time coming to Santa Anita. So that was a great time. Betting wise and opinion wise, I bookended the card with wins on the TQ show. I called Mike yesterday morning and told him that he was right and I was wrong about my initial impression of the first race of the day with the 6-horse Chiapano, whatever, Chipano, Pasito, whatever.
Pasadino, Cipollino, or
something.
Wasn't it Chopino Pasadino? No.
There you go.
Whatever. If you say so.
It was a weird day. I had one of my strongest opinions was wrong. And Findley's Lucky Charm, who got nailed at the wire by a horse that I never would have played in Constellation. Good for her. And then it finished the day with Conquest Enforcer winning, which was awesome because friend of the podcast, Blake Jesse, is involved with Luch Stables, and so my son and I and my niece, who's with me as well, got to go down to the winner's circle and get our picture taken, and then got a picture with Pratt in the Luch Silks afterwards. So it was definitely a day to remember. Probably a wagering day to forget.
Yeah, I think I certainly emphasize that last point for myself, but you do make a good point about the racetrack as a great place for family. I've had days at Saratoga where I wasn't going to go, where I was content to maybe do a couple of spot plays from home, where Perrin has come up and grabbed me by the shirt and said, "Daddy, let's go to the racetrack." There's a lot of fun activities that can be enjoyed there, and it sounds like you guys were able to take full advantage of that. Any particular highlights other than obviously the winner's circle picture at the end of the day, JK? But any other family friendly highlights from the day?
Well, a couple of fun stories from that. Well, first one is that if we're being honest, the racetrack. It's a different trip with a child than it is with your buddies, right? I mean, obviously, it was a little bit different for me, considering my normal behavior at the racetrack. So that was the first part. The second thing is we had a good time. We ended up sitting in front runner instead of sitting in the Logan, just because there's cigar smoke. There's a lot more intensity with the amount of wagering going on in there. I just didn't feel like it'd be child appropriate to be there the whole time. At one point, we ordered ice cream in the front runner. And they didn't have it. They had a limited menu on opening day, on Breeders' Cup Day, and so they didn't have any ice cream. So I haven't told you the story yet, Pete, but I called a friend who was sitting in the Logan, and I said, "Where's Arcadia? Is she around?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Hand her the phone." He handed her the phone. I said, I said, "Austin really wants ice cream. Can you order it? And we'll come down there and grab it." We came down. She had these 2 ice cream sundae setups for the kids to eat. So. That was definitely his highlight of the trip. So,
fabulous stuff from the always amazing Orchidia. That's great. So you got a little taste of the Logan, but yeah, Front Runner is a great place for any. Whenever I take friends to Santa Anita who aren't like dyed-in-the-wool racetrackers, Logan, as great as it is, it's a horse player's room. And, you can have a guest there and it's fine, but I feel much more comfortable if I'm bringing outsiders to do something like a hang in the Front Runner and then maybe go like hit Logan for a bit at the end of the day or something like that. So I definitely get it, but any specific thoughts on the stakes races, JK? And then I'll ask Mike the same question after you have a chance to comment on the 2 Grade 1s we saw yesterday.
I thought the race was over when 10 Blessings missed the break a little bit. Kind of got that trip we've talked about, feels like 3 times over the last few podcasts or webinars where he missed the break and then rushed up. So that wasn't. I think that race changed. I'm a little bit frustrated about Mind Your Biscuits. I was trying to be really clever and be against that horse, considering the horse was 0 for 3 going 7/8 and was kind of going to be overbet off of that Breeders' Cup performance, but proved me wrong. Down the hill race was great. I'm not really sure what the trip Ohio was getting there, but I was definitely wrong. It's one of those sound bites that'll probably come back to bite me on the Betty's Bambino thing. If she's 5-2, if she's 5-2, you don't want to bet her. If she's 6-1, she won't win. And how about me nailing the 6-1 and really being able to get it thrown in my face? And she ran like she was never losing. So, but it all kind of wrapped up for me with Conquest Enforcer. Obviously, watching the race, even more than having a wager on it, I was rooting for the horse so bad for the experience of being able to take my son into the winner's circle. And so when he won, that was a lot of fun. And I think I think he's a good horse. He ran a really fast time. I'll be interested to see what the figure comes back from various sources, but pretty impressive. And I think he'll be one to be reckoned with moving forward.
Mike, how about you? Any thoughts on those stakes or anything else from Santa Anita yesterday?
Well, if you listen to the full webinar podcast, you'll realize that I started strong with a cold double, and then the third race I actually played a cold pick 3 with my 3 top choices in the first 3 races. The third race, Law Abiding Citizen, was 13-1. The 4 horse, I was alive in a cold pick 3 to him. I think it was paying about $1,000 for 2, and I don't know if you watched the race, but boy, he got really shut off on the backstretch, lost about 5 lengths, then re-rallied, only got beat a little bit, and got elevated on up to second after the DQ of the winner in that race. And I think from there, that's kind of that was a sign for the rest of my day.
I can't hear.
Oh, I know you can't hear. I'll
I like it. That's a very successful cameo.
Yes. It was still a great day of racing, lots of really good races, lots of fun races. And, I think, Jonathan, your point about Betty's Bambino and the odds, while it might have come back to bite you, I think that's a very solid point to make about horses being cold or being bet. And I think an even more appropriate use of that was the absolute lack of money that Jazzy Times took. What was he? He was like 25-1, went off at 20-1 for a horse that Baffert had been high on for a while. If this horse had a chance at all, the money was not coming in. And, he set an early pace, but ended up finishing last. I think that's a really good example of just a horse that takes absolutely no money and what it means from an actual performance standpoint.
Yeah, that we talked about it the other day on the webinar, that it's a dangerous game trying to read the tote board, and it's like all factors in handicapping, not everything is going to work every time. The whole point is not to find a magic bullet in your handicapping. If you're trying to find that, I think that's going to be a fool's game and something that you're just going to end up banging your head against the wall. All you're trying to do is find a couple of percentage edge. It's like being a card counter in a casino. You're trying to take the odds and turn them in your favor. And for some people, and I include myself in this group, I do believe that a reading of the tote board can represent a tiny part of my handicapping arsenal. And I feel like in aggregate, those skills have paid off in my handicapping career and saved me some bets and put me on to plenty of winners as well, especially in maiden races. But, like anything else, blind adherence in handicapping, you're gonna be in trouble. But, you can take something that's a valid idea, and sometimes it just blows up in your face. I mean, JK, do you just view this as a time where you used that information and it didn't work out, or does it make you question the very nature of trying to read the tote board?
Well, one of the tricky things, and one of the lessons, like I said, I pick up all the time, you pick up lessons all the time, is that the idea of it being cold on the board with a firster or a comeback horse, you got to kind of know a little bit about the barn. The Urton barn is not really a bet out barn, the D'Amato barn, there's some action that will follow those types of horses, things like that. And when I still stick to the point that I think that she surprised them, or I'm sure golly, the Betty thing, it kills me every time. I still think that he surprised them by the performance because he was so cold on the board. I was wrong, but I'll still stick to that plan moving forward a majority of the time.
You make a great point about how if you want to play that game, if you want to dance that tango of trying to interpret the odds, knowing the barn you're dealing with is critical, because there are outfits for which that's far more true, that horse being bet equals horse being live, than other outfits that are more, they're just trying to win a race, not trying to cash a bet. And this actually segues interestingly into one of the questions we received, and most of the show today is going to be all listener-provided questions and comments, sort of a listener appreciation show for our 200th. That's where I ended up wanting to go with our 200th show today. And this will segue nicely into one of the questions, and it has to do with this idea that steam that we're trying to identify when we're reading the tote board. It can come from owners, it can come from the barn, or it can come from clockers. Now, when you're dealing with horses who are running on turf, the clocker piece of the equation, I'm not going to say it's irrelevant, but I mean, and JK, I'll ask you if you agree with me on this. For me, it's far more relevant if I'm looking at clocker steam about a horse who's going to be running on dirt, evaluating their dirt workouts, than it is for looking at horses who are going to be running on the turf. Do you agree or disagree?
That's a recent lesson that I've learned. C+ workouts for turf horses on the dirt. I can't tell you how many in my early years I've missed by just like tossing the C+ workout horse on the dirt who's going to be a turf horse who's running on the turf. They're turf horses for a reason, right? I mean, that's why they're a turf horse, is because they don't excel as much on the dirt. If you have a dirt horse in North America, you run them on the dirt because that's where the money is. So it seems like an obvious situation. Maybe it is for some of our listeners. It took me a couple of losses to figure that out.
Mike, where do you stand on that issue of looking at workouts for turf horses and that question that came in?
I'm kind of with Jonathan. I mean, and I'm not a huge workout guy in general. I know Jonathan follows it a lot more closely than I do. I'll take a look at them, but I don't. I kind of tend to figure that the market will accommodate for it. And a good example is that Baffert Firster that was bet down to around even money and didn't hit the board. That horse is probably going to be good at some point and will win, but obviously has talent in the morning that the clockers saw. But that doesn't mean that horse is going to win first out. And often situations like that just give better value on the other runners in the race. So I try not to focus too heavily on the one the clockers think is the best one in the morning. But in terms of turf horses working, I think it's absolutely less important, at least from my handicapping standpoint, because a lot of times these workouts will show speed, and speed tends to be much more dangerous on the dirt. And the ones on the turf, they're often doing different things. They're being asked to maybe finish a little bit differently. The goals of trainers are often different with turf horses. So, I want to look for regular works. I want to look for, no huge gaps in the work tab. I want to make sure that the horse seems to be in good form since whatever last race we're looking at. But I don't put a ton of emphasis at all on the turf horse works.
One general point I'd make about when you hear workout steam or see good workout reports is trying to evaluate it in the context of what the horse wants to do. If I hear some really good information about a horse and how the horse is working, and the horse is bred to rout on both sides, I'm not going to hold that against that horse if the horse debuts going 5 furlongs and maybe gets a little bit outrun early or has some other issue. Same thing, obviously, if you're talking about a turf runner. At the same time, when you hear that steam on a horse who's bred to sprint on the dirt and that horse doesn't run well, that's a horse I might identify as one to continue to bet against, trying to take that information and not just have that information that you hear before a maiden race and have it be useful to you on the first day of a horse's career, but have it be of interest to you as the horse continues to develop. You may circle a horse who you've heard some good things about. You may circle turf for that horse. That horse might not get to the turf for 4 or 5 starts, but you can use your notes in Formulator to have that blaring message reminding you that from the get-go you've heard good things about this horse and the pedigree suggests turf, and that's a situation where you can maybe ignore those 4 muddy-looking dirt races and cash a decent bet when the runner finally gets to be doing what he or she was bred to do, whether you're talking about routing or turf. So those are my thoughts on the workout question as well. There's so many good questions we have from the last couple of weeks. I'm going to keep this next one because I think it segues nicely because it's also pertains to young horses. And it has to do with using your evaluation of the visual aspects of a race, specifically when it comes to a horse switching leads and what it means to you in your handicapping, especially with younger runners, but feel free, Jonathon, to answer about older runners as well. When you see horses not switch leads, first of all, is it something that you even write down in the copious trip notes I know that you keep? And from there, how do you use that information going forward?
Yeah, no, I definitely add when a horse doesn't switch leads. I think that it can tell a couple of things. And the first time I really learned about it, and if you can find it somewhere still, I don't know if it's still in the DRF shop or not, but there's a DVD that Dan Illman put out a long time ago that was like a trip handicapping thing. It was the first time he introduced it. I think it indicates 2 negative things, 3 negative things. One, that a horse is green, that a horse isn't focused, obviously. For instance, like with Nyquist, I think Nyquist switched leads late in the Florida Derby. That was a focus thing. It wasn't necessarily a negative, but it was a focus thing. It can also indicate at the lower levels maybe a sore horse, a horse that's uncomfortable, a horse that has an issue, so he switches leads in that situation. And then the other situation is just a horse that's tired, a horse that's fully extended and is trying to find more and is kind of switching leads to try to find that reserve of energy. And so that's why I keep track of it.
Let me ask you, though, I mean, I would almost argue that with the sort of the younger the horse, to see that kind of goofy behavior, like, couldn't you almost argue it as a positive? Like, hey, this horse ran really well, ton of natural talent, not a barn that's known for putting the screws to them and getting to be super professional right from the get-go. Maybe this is something the horse can sort out and continue to improve from if you're looking at a young horse that has other signs of talent. Or do you always see that as a negative, Jonathon?
I think maybe as a younger horse, you can kind of get excited about the idea that, oh, he ran so well despite doing this, or he was finishing so well on the wrong lead, to suggest that there's probably more in the tank, that if he was on his correct lead, he would be finishing more efficiently. Yeah, no, it's never not always it's not never not always. That was like a triple double negative. It's not always a negative. But it's something that I want to know. It's something that I want to be aware of when I'm evaluating a race. When I look down, I want to see it. For instance, Conquest Enforcer switched leads late. What does that mean? Was he tired? Well, he had a right to be tired. He went pretty quick, chased pretty fast fractions, first off of a long break. To me, that suggests that there might be more in the tank. Or he's a goofy horse, and that's kind of what one of the owners mentioned, is that he's always kind of been a quirky horse. So, take it as far as you want. But I think it's something you do want to identify and at least be aware of.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I want to pay attention to. But it's one of those things that it's very hard. I think, like a lot of things in handicapping, you will gain sort of handicapper's muscle memory over time, looking at horses and trying to identify when it's a positive and when it's a negative, because it's not always clear. And even in the immediate aftermath of a race, you mentioned Nyquist's Florida Derby. Even from there, it wasn't clear to me whether that was a positive or negative. So it's definitely, like, if I were to list for me the most important things in trip handicapping, and let's say there were 10 things on the list. For me, it would honestly, I want to know it, but relative to how many other relevant things there are in trip handicapping, it would be like 9th or 10th on that list. How about you, Mike Hogan? Where does the idea of paying attention to lead changes fall in your handicapping?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you guys. I do look for it, and I look at it as, like Pete, you were implying, I look at it as a potential positive for improvement on a young horse, especially a lightly raced horse. If I see one that is running well, makes a nice move, and then is not changing leads late, I'm able to project some potential improvement based on maybe that greenness, maybe some experience. Changing leads next time, the horse will run much better. However, if it's a horse, and the example I often use is firing line in the Derby. If there's a horse that has changed leads professionally in all of his starts, and then suddenly it does not change leads, refuses to change leads, and you got to watch the jockey on this. Sometimes the jockey's not asking, and maybe I don't negatively look at it, but if the jockey is asking and trying to get the horse to change leads, and the horse just refuses to for whatever reason, or is unable to, I see that as a huge negative and a huge sign that there may be something wrong, that the horse just is protecting themselves, does not want to go to the other lead.
That is an excellent point, Mike, and I agree with you. That to me is an unambiguously bad sign, and something that I would definitely be not expecting forward movement out of a horse who's always done it professionally and then has that issue. And I'd also just underline that point that I think I made quickly about what kind of an operation the horse is from. Some barns so known for working very hard with their horses in the morning, and if they're trained, the more professionally they're trained, the more they're trained to be, not that other trainers aren't professional, but the more they're sort of built to hit the racetrack fully formed as opposed to come along slowly, the more I'd be suspicious of that type of thing. Jonathon, this next question is absolutely perfect for you. This one comes from a friend of the podcast, Brad Heil. He says, I was on a flight a couple of months ago coming back from Europe and got stuck in the middle seat in coach on a 7+ hour flight directly in front of a small child, probably 5 to 7 years old, who had a nasty habit of kicking the back of my seat as soon as I started falling asleep. If I ever encounter this again, is it appropriate to say something, or should I just order a couple of stiff drinks and push through? Jonathon, what do you think?
Well, here's what I would do. I would order the drinks, but then that would give me the courage to turn around and say something. So it's a tricky situation. It's a very tricky situation. Yeah, I don't know. I've always been nervous that someone's going to try to correct my kid, and then I'm going to have to get into an altercation. I would just have a couple of drinks, see if you can fall asleep. If you can't, reach over and ask mom if she can help you out.
Yeah, I think there's probably a way to do that where you could. I would never go into scold the child mode. That's not going to help. But perhaps, I mean, I think plan A, and as three guys with small children, I think we can all agree, plan A would be grin and bear it if you could. But if you couldn't, there's probably a way of doing it without, I've seen people like yell at other people's children, and that's not the way to get what you want in life, I would have to say. Mike, you've done some travel in your day. Where do you stand on this issue?
Yeah, I think there's a way you can broach the subject nicely without it seeming like you're scolding someone else's kid. You can just turn around and smile, and there's a way you can get the message across without causing issues.
I would probably ask him if we were flying from Europe. I would ask him if he was trying out for the EPO.
Humor is always a good resource in these awkward situations. I like that. Let's see. We got a bunch of other questions to get to, and we have a great story that we'll do when we get a little bit later in the show. But a few more questions I want to go through here. Here's another more general one, and it is: do any of us have? And Mike, we'll start with you on this one. Do any of us have a particular pet peeve about horse players? Something that we see that bothers us, sort of a companion question. Is there any sort of unwritten rule at the racetrack that drives us crazy? You got anything? Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think you can spot a new player or a new horse player when they start celebrating before the finish line, which is obviously also a pet peeve. I don't know how many times I've turned to somebody and be like, "Oh man, no, please no."
We've got this. We've got it for sure.
Right. He's got it. We won. No. Don't be that guy. Don't be that guy, because a couple times, all it takes is one. Once you realize that anything can happen. We've seen jockeys fall off. You've seen horses try and jump the rail. You've seen even just horses that are clear all of a sudden just tire. Don't do that.
I don't know. Jonathon Kinchen strikes me as the kind of guy who might be already walking up to window when his horse is up by 3 in the stretch. What do you think, JK?
Yeah, I'll make a slightly aggressive move towards the window when I'm clear by 6 at the 16th pole, but it's more of a kind of like a high stepping into the end zone thing. It's just for a little extra flair. but beware, Leon Lett beware, Don Beebe could be running after you. One of those types of situations. You know what? I'm sitting here thinking of like 185 things I hate. There's a couple. One is I hate like the prophetic like horseplayer, as if like, when you're successful, you act as if you knew that was going to happen and that you somehow are the most brilliant human being in the world, and that annoys me to all end. It just drives me insane. I'll be happy when I win. I'll talk to close friends about what kind of got me there, but I get really, really annoyed at the run around the racetrack beating my chest. Well, Todd Pletcher 7-1, Todd Pletcher 7-2, like you and the rest of the world knew that the Todd was going to win at 7-1. So that drives me a little bit insane. But for the most part, I can deal with almost anything. The over talker is a little bit much for me. The guy that just like won't get the social cue that you've got something else you need to take care of, and they want to stand there and talk about the second. Like, look, man, everyone's got a bad beat story. Make it quick. Make them quick in the right audience.
I'll just add to that. Jonathon, you mentioned celebration, you mentioned sports. I think one of the things that I always like is act like you've been there before, act like you're going back again. When you win, this isn't the first time, let's hope, and let's hope it's not the last. So, celebrate a little, but don't go overboard.
I have a threshold for going over 5 decibels. Like, there's a dollar threshold before you get too loud. We've all been in the room where we've seen some guy celebrating like crazy, and the word comes, especially in the tournament room. I can think of, one of those guys on my list that I don't like, we talked about a few weeks ago. I remember the Gulfstream tournament. He was going nuts. And I thought, oh my God, I was on the lead. I was like, he caught me. He got like a 50-cent try that paid like $400. I'm like, dude, calm down.
What's the old Andy Beyer line? It's not appropriate to root for a horse unless he represents at least whatever it was, 25% of your annual income. That's a little too austere for me, but I would prefer that to the other extreme that you just described, Jonathon. I mean, for me, I'm a rooter. I like to root in exciting situations. I will be very sensitive, though, about rooting. Like, if it's a horse, I'm more likely to root for Jonathon's horse than my average bet. I will certainly root in one of like a significant bet, but I think it's really fun to root for other people and to get into it. So that for me is where I try to do that. I would, if I knew somebody at the table was dead against my play, in that situation, it would need to have to represent a whole lot of money for me to pipe up. I try to be sensitive about it, but that's not my main pet peeve. My main pet peeve, I think the flip side of the coin that Jonathon, by the way, I think I remember the horse you mean, if it happened to be from Saratoga when there were some folks giddily celebrating the 7-1 Todd Pletcher that won. If it was a Saratoga incident, I definitely remember the horse, though I don't remember the name. But the thing that gets me more than that is tipping without solicitation. It drives me a little crazy. Some guys are subtle about it, and they'll just come up to you and they'll volunteer their opinion quickly and like whatever. And obviously, it's, to me though, like the etiquette of the racetrack is such that, yeah, I'll hear your opinion. Wait for me to ask for it. There are guys, and I'm good friends with some of them, and they will just come up to you and talk your ear off about every horse they like in the late pick 3, and it's just, it's like, to me, it's just a breach of etiquette if you don't do it. If you do it out of nowhere, you want to wait till you're asked. And I think it's partially because of what Jonathon was saying. We all have 50 million things going on at the track, and like we don't always have time to listen. Like, we're happy to listen to that kind of soliloquy when it's 17 minutes before a race we don't have any plans of betting and don't need to go to the paddock, etc. But that's the one for me. Tipping without solicitation. It's bad news, guys. I suggest you stay away from it.
It's one of my favorite. This is one of the things I do love. Is being around a horse player, and you're having a semi-serious conversation, or that maybe they're telling you a serious story, and when they acknowledge the fact that, like, hey, feel free if you need to make a bet. Like, I can, whatever, do your thing. Like, because you feel like, oh, he's kind of telling me about how his life fell apart 10 years ago, but I really kind of need to get this bet in because it is 1 minute to post. I appreciate the guy that recognizes that that we're working here a little bit and allows you the social pass to kind of look away for a second and be preoccupied getting a bet in.
And I'd say, honestly, for me, it's one of the things that I look for in people I want to hang out with at the track. Oh, I just thought of another one. This was a really good question. I didn't expect the depths of ideas we were talking about with it. But there's another. It's on the tip of my brain. It came through and then it went out. So I'm going to take a second and think again. Meanwhile, I'll send it back to Mike just for 1 second to see if there was any other things along this line in terms of horse player etiquette that you can't stand.
Well, there's the red board guy. That's like, oh yeah, I got to tell you about how I hit that late double for $50, and like they've never lost a bet. The guys that never lost a bet, those guys are really annoying because, like, look, that's great, that's wonderful, congratulations, but this guy maybe had 8 losers. He might have even had 8 losers in that race where he hit the bet, but he only tells you about the one that he hit, and it was the the $600 signer that come on, man.
People, I think it comes down to me, this idea, something Frank Scottoni and I have spoken about it at great length in our time as friends and horse players, and it's the people who'd rather be right than they'd be rich. Like, they make all kinds of crazy bets that they're not going to be winning players, but they just want to tell you about how smart they were when they win. And the flip side of that, which also to me is like sine qua non of, if I want to hang out with you at the track, you got to be able to lose. Like, I've seen people who can't lose, who get, like, it's okay to get angry for a few seconds or whatever, but I'm talking about somebody who's going to, like, steam the whole day and fill the box / room / table on the patio at the Shake Shack with bad vibes, still talking about some perceived slight from a rider or trainer back in race 4. Like, I can't handle that stuff at all. Like, you gotta, if you want to have fun at the track, I think you gotta, bring good vibes. I think it's not just etiquette. I think it also contributes to winning. Jonathon, you're always hanging with a big group of people seemingly at the track. For you, what are the important things in being a good, what makes somebody fun to hang out with at the track for you?
Oh, I think one of the things I was going to say is identify your circle of friends that you are comfortable with, and they are comfortable with you sharing your betting amounts, right? Don't tell a stranger that you had a $500 double go into that horse. It's just kind of rude. Look, that's an important part of the story you tell to that circle of friends that I told you to identify, that you can share those numbers with. I wouldn't just, I wouldn't be on TV and to say, oh, I had a $20 double there or whatever. It's kind of rude. So anyways, that's one thing I would definitely do. The other thing that I don't like, and I cannot remember the YouTube clip. I know Pete will know exactly which one I'm talking about. You can find it somewhere. Is please, please, please don't smush me. Like, don't mush me when I'm turning for home. Don't tell me I'm home. Please don't tell me I'm home. Just wait till I cross the wire. So I need my friends to not be mushes and not tell me I'm home when the race isn't over yet.
Who knew we were such difficult guys with so many things that bothered us? I had no idea, but that's a great one. And I believe the scene, I can't remember the character's name. I think it might have been like Jimmy the Mush. I believe it was in A Bronx Tale when he sees I think it's Chaz Palminteri, sees the mush character rooting for the same horse as he has during the stretch, and he just right away just tears up the tickets and sends them away because he knows once the mush starts rooting, he's in trouble. And they must be partially fictitious, right? We're all grown-ups here, but there is no doubt that there are some people who I've encountered and stories of people who you just don't want to be on the horse that they're on. But back to the point that Jonathon makes about the amounts, and here's a social media habit. I really don't like ticket flashing. I don't know why, but it just strikes me as just somehow a breach of horse player etiquette to flash your tickets with the amounts and stuff. It's just gauche and unprofessional to me. Mike, am I being too much am I a little too get off my lawn with that one?
I get that because I kind of am the same way. It's like, it's between you and your accountant, I guess, how much you're betting. But at the same time, the flip side of that coin is sometimes you hear people saying, "Oh yeah, I had this." Well, I don't believe it unless you actually show me evidence that you hit that pick 5 for $2,500 or whatever. So, I get it. Social media is a little tough, and I kind of see both sides, and I appreciate the people that will put their opinions out prior to the race, and then will actually back it up, whether they show it or not. But that they actually bet it.
Well, you got more? Keep going, JK.
Yeah, just real quick. How about the guy at the track who doesn't say anything? It's the race is over, and he comes up and hands you his ticket. Whoa, dude! I look. Just tell me how you got beat. I don't want to read this. Just tell me. And then you're trying to read it. You're looking. It's like a super try. So you're like, try 7 with 1-4-6-2 with 1-4-6-2. Then you're like, okay, 1-4-6-7-1. You're trying to figure out where he got bad beat, so then you can now console him. Like, dude, just tell me what the problem was.
That's amazing. And I've absolutely had that happen. And it gets back to this idea that bad beat stories are boring because they're all exactly the same. With rare exception, all exactly the same. You should have won and you lost. Now, granted, when we had our bad beat contest, we had some special ones, and that's different. I'll always take time out to hear how you lost a bet because there was a revolution in a South American country. I'm never going to complain about that. But the sort of garden variety nipped at the wire, yeah, I don't need to hear that, and I definitely don't want to have to work for it to figure out that was the way that story ended. So I realize this is appropriate. Not only, we've got all the holidays that the people are celebrating this time of year, Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever's your preference, but it's also Festivus. So it's very appropriate that on this episode, number 200 of the DRF Players podcast, we had our airing of the grievances. So I feel good. The show got very grounded today. So thanks immensely for that question about horse player pet peeves.
I got a lot of problems with you people. Now you're going to hear about it.
Next question is a little more prosaic. We'll get into this one, and then we're going to segue to a holiday tale that's actually, I was really touched when this came across the transom yesterday, but a practical question first that I think we can deal with rather quickly. It's about the crop of 2-year-old, soon-to-become 3-year-old fillies. And the question was, should we have been surprised about American Gal's loss the other weekend, given how weak we all said on this very show that the juvenile fillies race was, or should we have maybe expected a little more for some of the runners coming out of that race to lose when they were facing horses with upside? And Jonathon, we'll start with you. Your opinion about, maybe we should have been a little bit smarter about going against American Gal in that spot.
Well, I think it's all relative, right? It's like if the juvenile fillies, which is supposed to be our biggest and best race for 2-year-old fillies, wasn't very good, then you have to think that the grade 1 that's kind of a secondary race to that at Los Al is got to be even weaker. And so with American Gal running like she did and the better of the two races, I still feel comfortable that we weren't going down the wrong path with how we expected she was going to run. But they're just not that good.
Yeah, that's sensible. I would say that the point made there, though, coming back in the spring for a race that comes right after the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, I think Jonathan's point is, I hadn't thought of that, and I think your point is excellent. That race is coming back so quick that you wouldn't expect those upside fillies to have caught up yet. I do think it's certainly an interesting point for that race as the calendar turns, and with every month, the other 2-year-old fillies who weren't in that race more of an opportunity to mature. So I think that's I can see looking at that from I don't think it's a bad point, but I think JK makes a good defense of the near stone cold singled way we played that pick 4 that day. Mike, how about you? What do you think of this idea of taking a skeptical view of American Gal and the other fillies coming out of the juvenile fillies going forward?
I think Jonathan's absolutely right that going forward and for next year, I don't really want any of them out of there. And I'll use the example of Take Charge Brandy's win. She was huge odds. Everybody was surprised by her win, and everyone was like, oh, she got lucky. Turned out she was actually the best one in that field, and that was a really weak field. I mean, at Angela Renee, top decile, ran second. There were very few others that came out of the race that went on to anything even close to what Take Charge Brandy did. And I think we have a similar year this year. I mean, maybe one of them will continue to improve and get good for next year, but I, in general, want to play against all of those going forward next year on the road to the Kentucky Oaks. But that said, like Jonathan's point, I think is absolutely right. It's a class step down from that. And American Gal, though might not have been the strongest field, she by far ran the best race in there. And, at a short price, I'm always looking to take a stand against a horse, but she just looked like she was the best one. And, it makes sense if you think that the best one is not going to be beaten. You take it as a free square.
Yeah, it did not work out that time for sure, but I do think the underpinnings of the decision made some sense. All right, let's move on to this tremendous piece of listener mail that we received. This falls into, I think, to some degree, the Tales from the Track mode of the podcast that we get to once in a while. I'm just going to read the whole thing. This is from Joe Yavelak. Hi, Pete, Mike, and Jonathan. My brother and I are huge fans of the podcast and have been since the Bernier days. I'm going to tell you the long version of the story because I think it's all important for context, but needless to say, you played an integral role in a critical stage in his recovery from a serious cardiac episode. I'm 34, my brother Donnie is 28, and we're from North Carolina, where there is no horse racing and very few horse racing fans. We've been fans since Smarty Jones and have gradually become more and more serious about following the sport. With no one here to talk racing with besides each other, we've latched onto the podcast and have learned so much from it, for better or worse. I was wondering, fiddle aside, the worst part, I was wondering which specific piece of bad advice we gave Byrne, the poor guy. Anyway, back to the letter. Donnie drives a lot for work, so he listens to the podcast and Steve Bick, and we talk about it afterwards. It's a regular part of our life as anything, and it drives our wives crazy. And there, my second footnote, something I've always been good at is irritating women, so that fits right in with that. Back to the letter. Donnie and his wife were expecting their first child on December 18th. His wife went past her due date, so the 19th, they were going to the doctors. They were sitting in a car across the street from the hospital talking when Donnie had sudden cardiac arrest. His heart stopped, he had no pulse, and suddenly we're talking about a different kind of odds. His wife was cooler under pressure than Big Money Mike Smith, called 911, and did everything exactly right, all while 1 day past her due date. The paramedics were there in less than 5 minutes, and thanks to more than racing luck, he made it. Fast forward a couple of days. He's got a long road to recovery. The family is all at the hospital, and we received the news that he developed an infection in his lungs that was compromising the recovery. And his wife was in labor. Donnie had been unconscious this whole time, and his body became agitated. The doctors were doing the best they could, but the room was tense. With me, my dad, and my brother in the room, I wanted to take him to his most comfortable place, so we put on Tuesday's DRF Players podcast and listened to it. As the show went on, Donnie calmed down, and his vitals started improving. It turned out to be the turning point in his recovery. Donnie was transferred to a new hospital where he continued to recover. His wife gave birth to their first son and future horseman. It was a Christmas to remember, and we are thankful for the podcast for being a consistent part of our lives. That and the Lasix. He was first-time Lasix. I was talking to Donnie today about opening day for Santa Anita, and he said he was going to try to catch up on the podcast. I told him he'd already heard Tuesdays, but he might not remember it. Anyway, thanks guys for all you do. Sometimes the difference you make isn't even the one you'd expected. Happy holidays, Joe Yavelak, friend of the podcast. Fantastic stuff, Joe. Absolutely made my holiday to know that even in some small, possibly imagined way, that we helped out and helped Donnie. It's just terrific, and really appreciate the kind words and the shout out. JK, what do you make of that? You've accomplished a lot of things in your life. Did you ever know you'd helped somebody in such dire straits, medically speaking?
No, it's really cool. I read it the other when he sent it. You guys forwarded it on. It makes you feel pretty good. Makes you feel a little bit better about all the people that you didn't help with losers. You help somebody else out with just a little bit of entertainment and something to kind of take their mind off of more pressing issues.
Mike, how about you? You especially with having close family involved in the medical profession, I assume that note resonated with you all the more.
Oh, absolutely. And, I'll also mention that after that email, Joe mentioned that Donnie was going into he was going to be having surgery today. So our thoughts are going out to him. He's definitely on my mind today. And, I hope all continues to go well. But, it's just a fantastic story. And sorry if you hear the dog barking, the UPS guys showing up at the worst possible time.
The listeners are used to that from Muggs, the handicapping Labrador. We could have a loop of her barking actually as part of that. If we ever do that history of the show thing, we'll definitely need a 30-second barking montage. We can throw that right in there.
But the other thing I'll mention, and I don't know if she's going to stop unless I go actually talk to her. Yeah, it's okay. All right. But the other thing I mention is what I love about it is we've got all these people out there who listen that we don't even know. And, I could just consider everybody, I'm the kind of the quintessential nice guy of the group, maybe. I just consider everybody a friend I haven't met yet. So it's just really nice to hear that we had a couple friends in North Carolina that regularly listen to us and, that take the time. It's like that as much as anything is what I took out of it. And it just made me feel good.
It's great. It's nice. And I think it's much easier now, for all that I make fun of horse racing, social media and all that. It's nice that we live in a time where between things like a community of podcast listeners and connecting with each other on Twitter, Facebook, whatever it is, that horse players have never had an easier time finding each other. And I'm certainly not one of these doom and gloom guys about the state of racing, but there's no doubt that it fills in a much smaller part of the sporting landscape than it once did when you had, 40,000 people at Belmont Park on a Thursday. But it's nice to be able to sort of get back some of that collegial camaraderie, whatever you want to talk about. And I mean, Jonathon, you're always the poster child for this, having 1.5 friends in racing when you started in the sport, and now having 50 plus. How big for you in tournament play, particularly, is this idea of just being able to connect with other horse players and hopefully make a difference to them in ways big and small at the track and also just in life in general?
Yeah, I mean, that's what makes it so much fun, right? I mean, to be able to interact with other people. I think just as humans in general, we want to be able to share experiences. It's like, it's not that much fun to do stuff on your own. But when you've got people that share the same interests, that understand the accomplishment when you do hit a nice bet or win a tournament, it's all the better to have someone to share it with. So it's definitely been the biggest plus the last few years, is having people to bounce ideas off of and people to learn from. And so, obviously the way that technology is nowadays, it's kind of a safe haven for those types of relationships to build.
I like it. And I can't think of a better way to end this holiday edition of the DRF Players Podcast than that story. So that's all for today. We're going to take Friday off. I think there's a lot of traveling. We wanted to do one show for this traveling week for folks to be able to catch up on. We'll be back next Tuesday. I do want to thank Jonathon Kinchen, of course. I want to thank Mike Hogan. I want to thank specifically, of course, Donnie and Joe Yavelak for sharing that story, and extend my get well wishes to Donnie as well. And most of all, I want to thank everybody who tunes in and makes the show what it is. Mike said it before. When we started, we didn't know if we were going to make 5 episodes, and now we're at 200 and counting. That's largely due to the enthusiasm that the audience has shown, and I personally can't thank you enough for it. As I said, we will be back on Tuesday. Until then, I should give my name, too, for those listening live. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. Until then, may you win all your photos.